Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Angy Stacy and I'm a professor of chemistry. And what I'm hoping to do today is that we can really engage you in a conversation about the inequitable hierarchies that exist either on purpose or inadvertently in our classrooms, in society, and in the narratives around who gets to belong and who gets to be smart at the various things that we teach. And I want to begin, just in order to frame it, to read a quote from a student. This is a freshman student. This is her first semester in general chemistry. And what she says, and I shortly found out that it was going to be more than just intellect that I needed to get through the course, because I know it's not something I like to point out, but it's there. The fact that I'm a black student. And when I was in chem, the big lecture with Professor so-and-so, I would sit in front, and I'm always so confident about my answers, but just raising your hand and noticing everyone look at you in unison like, what the hell, she knows the answer? The professor was kind of dismissing me. They knew I was one of those kids who was going to get weeded out. It's like they have a set expectation of who they know is going to remain in the sciences. So they try to nurture that one. It's kind of like the bird effect. You feed the strongest bird and you feed the weaker bird last. So that's kind of how it felt. And in talking to students, we also know that here they are coming into a chemistry course. They're thinking about engineering, biology. They're thinking about being in the profession, and their view of what the course means to them is, what does it mean to be good or smart at science? Getting good grades, thinking quickly, having natural ability. These are all narratives and messages that they've taken up. And so what we want to talk about today is, in what ways are we pushing these narratives out on the students, and how do we need to rethink what we do? And so you're in for a real treat, because we have a wonderful panel of 3 people. And just as a quick introduction of each of them, first of all, they're all fabulous educators and fabulous researchers, which is just always such a wonderful combination. And I'll begin with Eugene Chiang at the end. Eugene's in the astronomy department. He is a world-class researcher in planetary dynamics. But in addition, he really cares about his teaching, and he cares about the overall teaching in the department. And as department chair, he's done a lot to promote good teaching practices and rethinking of how the teaching goes on. And then there's Brandi Catanese, who is the vice chair now of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies, but she is also in African American Studies. And her efforts are really embody the spirit of equitable outcomes, because what she tries to do in her classroom is to surface student voices and student experiences to inform the learning of the class, that the students really can learn from each other. And so she has a really wonderful pedagogical lens that she places on the class in order to create conditions where all students succeed. And then here is Lisa Pruitt from mechanical engineering. We're a little heavy on the science side, but maybe there are more issues in science than we can learn from Brandi. And again, Lisa is really exceptionally devoted to teaching. She has outstanding achievements as an educator and a mentor of graduate students, undergraduate students. She's been she's a mastery of introducing research frontiers into the classroom. And given the underrepresentation of women in mechanical engineering, Lisa's been really important in helping to increase and retain the number of female undergraduate and graduate students in engineering. And so I'm going to begin, and we hope that we'll really engage you in this. I'm going to begin with a question and let them all just give you a brief response, but then we hope to hear from you as well, questions and ideas. And so the first question is, why are equitable student outcomes an important aim of your teaching? Would you like to start?
Sure, I will start. One of the things I start with whenever I teach one of my classes is first a personal story of my own learning struggles. And honestly, until I moved into being an assistant professor, I'd only seen one female professor in engineering. When I was an undergrad, there were no women in engineering, so I definitely, this issue resonated for me. There are stereotypes, there are that same casting of what does it mean to be a woman, and probably some condescendence that goes with that. So it's not that I go deep on that side of it, but what I do share is my learning struggles starting at the K through 5 level and how that impacted me. And my father, being an aerospace engineer, really stepped in and did some other platforms of teaching so that I could learn. And I don't know where I would have landed had I not had that. And then I did a Felder Teaching Institute workshop about midway in my career. And that enlightened me in terms of differences in learning styles. And then I had this aha, self-reflective moment. And then I suddenly understood why certain courses were more challenging. And in engineering, we probably lean towards a very specific style. We tend to derive everything from principle, so favoring a sequential learner. We tend to be introspective or reflective, so again, we favor that style of learning. We tend to be intuitive. We don't necessarily know why we know something, but we know it, which is different than maybe someone that's a sensing learner that needs another platform of outcome. So I share my learning challenges, and then I share learning styles, and I do a questionnaire to the room. What are your learning styles? And that's the first time they're typically asked that question. And one of the things that I incorporate is how important it is, like how many students aren't making it to engineering because we weeded them out at K through 12 because their preference of learning didn't match essentially how we teach in the sciences. And it's Berkeley. They care a lot about societal good and outreach, and so I tap into that. So one of the things we do is making it equitable in the classroom is instead of moving towards a lot of exams, we have project-based learning. And one of the projects in each of my classes is an opportunity to go out and teach. And so I brought some kits here of things that students have done in my courses. One is teaching children how things break. And so this has gone anywhere from an elementary school, middle school, high school. And the challenge to each of the groups in my courses is you have to address all the learning platforms. And it changes things because they have to think about how they would express that. It makes them better educators, makes them learn the material more deeply, and it changes the conversation in the room. And so I have found that it's been a remarkably successful tool for me.
Brandi?
So my answer to the question of, why do we care about equitable outcomes, learning outcomes in the classroom, is both fuzzy in the sense that it contributes to students' sense of belonging on campus, the feeling that they are fully enfranchised in the mission of the institution, and that has positive effects, in the classroom, in the major, on campus more generally. But also it's about honoring the principle of access. That's one of our missions as a public institution. If students aren't getting the opportunity to learn in whatever their style is, an acknowledgement of their situatedness, then that has absolutely material effects on the rest of their experience on this campus, right? How prepared they feel for the next level of coursework within the curriculum, how competitive they appear to be for professional opportunities on campus and off campus, the quality of relationships that they're able to develop that can yield glowing or lukewarm letters of recommendation, et cetera, et cetera. So that feeling of belonging and encouragement and investment, or the lack of it, absolutely has an impact on the trajectory of their professional lives, their intellectual lives. As you said, how many people do we miss out on in terms of the contributions that they have to offer in any number of disciplines because of some little miss that causes them to step back instead of stepping toward something that they have a passion for? Leave it there.
Eugene?
Well, why are equitable outcomes desirable? Well, these are future taxpayers that will fund the NSF and NASA and our livelihood as astronomers. I teach Astro 7, which is the introduction to the major, it's an interesting class because we have to talk to not only the future astronomers in the audience, but also people who will never take another astronomy course ever again. And that's great. And we need to reach out, as instructors of this class, we need to reach out to that population and make sure that they, come out well, that they appreciate the beauty of the universe. Some of the best students, not the best performing students, but the people with just really wonderful attitudes who came into the class super excited about learning about cosmology and stars. And we want, the first rule of thumb is first do no harm. So they come in with tremendous interest, and we want them to leave with at least the same level of interest. And so that is an outcome that we desire. I'll also just add in closing that it's rather personal for me to ensure an equitable outcome, because I remember very well what it was like to be left out of the classroom, having sat in on so many technical science classes and felt like I just wasn't getting it. And at the time, I remember what it was like to sit in the lecture room and think, I am just not getting it. And I can see what the instructor is doing, and they're not talking to me, and I'm not getting it. And I thought to myself, if I ever wind up in that position of responsibility, I am not going to do what this person is doing. So for me, it's rather personal. I want to be able to reach out to students like me.
So I wonder if just quickly, there's a couple of questions that you want to ask so far, or do you want to hear more? Or have any insights to offer? Because we can say more. Go ahead.
How do you do to reach out to people that have a very low understanding of what you're teaching? When you said, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do different, can you give us an example, for example?
I spend all day thinking about this. Pop culture references are very a way to reach out to people. First, I should say, Astro 7, it's a class that where the prerequisite is that you don't have to have seen any astronomy, but calculus is a prerequisite. So people come in, okay, they don't necessarily know anything about space, but we do expect them to know calculus. That said, astronomy, I think we have a special advantage, right, in reaching out to everybody, because there's all this common reference points, movies, TV shows, and making references to that at any opportunity. Even if the joke falls flat, it's always good to try, right? And so helping to maintain that kind of an almost just a friendly atmosphere, that matters, without ever dumbing it down, I should say. So pop culture references is one trick. Another technique is analogies, right? So analogies, working by analogy. There's so many different ways of teaching. Coriolis effect, for example, just to think of one example, right? Coriolis effect. So how do you teach? You can write down -2 omega cross v, but you can also say, look, I was at the playground with my son on a merry-go-round, and we were both on these two separate horses, and I'm a good shot. I have a ball, I want to throw it to my son. I say, Noah, catch, and as accurately as I think I can aim it, I always miss, and it's because of the Coriolis force, because we're on a merry-go-round. So they're just ways of making it real to people, without ever dumbing it down. And we will write down the equation, but then at the same time, talking about real life applications.
So this was the next question anyway. What are a couple of examples? So I wonder if Brandi and you might want to add an example.
I absolutely agree with invocations of popular culture or other ways of connecting what you're trying to impart to the world that they already know. That sense of information coming in, it being new content, new concepts, but feeling like you've got a bunch of file cabinets in your brain for kinds of information you already have sorted, and knowing which folder or drawer to put new information into because it connects to something that you already know. I find that really important in my own teaching when we're trying to discuss, even a course in Black popular culture. For example, when we start with the high theory of popular culture and the idea of the popular and, circuits of culture and words that seem perfectly straightforward to me because I can't even remember when I learned them, but remembering that these things are new and always trying to take that time to say, like, okay, so try to go back to beginner mind and, when I didn't know this, what would have been helpful to me? So constantly making the effort to articulate in relation to their prior knowledge feels very important. And depending upon the students in the room, what you draw upon as potential prior knowledge is going to vary. And so trying to get an array of real world examples, I think, is also important. You don't want to assume that everyone, experienced ski week, or that everyone, vacations in the same way that you do, or has the same food references that you do, or any number of things. So just trying to get multiple examples that can reflect a broad cross-section of student prior knowledge is important to me.
And
So one of the things that I do as a personal challenge is I always have some type of hands-on demonstrative / activity that's with me, which is in part why I have to honor that piece. And that could be anything from silly putty, for which I'm going to use it to teach viscoelasticity, elastic behavior to viscous behavior, to real failures from my medical device lab. And so make it real, give it something they can touch and see. And then we don't have so much pop culture in mechanical engineering, but we do have a lot of engineering failures. And so we do a lot of case histories, historic failures, and what have we learned? And that's something that resonates for most students. And that's another way to draw it in terms of what's at stake with why we need to know this deeply. And I think that balance of bringing in a high-level challenge for society, as well as bringing in a demonstrative that helps you, again, that challenge of the other piece is I always try to address all learning styles in my own lectures. So that gives them those that need to have tactile input, visual input, global input, it's all captured. And so that's just how I try to address that.
You might find that YouTube has a whole universe of fail videos.
Mm-hmm.
There might be engineering fails.
Oh, there are. There are wonderful bridges that fall down.
That's what we
and-
use as our case studies.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
engineering failures are
There's a lot of popping.
there's a lot of plethora of yes, media.
I'm gonna add just a perspective on this. We signal, many of us in large lecture classes, especially classes that are graded on a curve, that being the fastest and the person who can spit back the information that I provided to you, and getting an A means that somehow you are the only person who's smart and you have some innate ability. And so one thing that I do in my classroom is to broaden significantly what it means to be good at science. And in fact, what often goes on in our classrooms is school science. It's not what scientists do. And so one thing that I've really been working on is how to bring in information in ways that scientists actually look at information and consider information, and in convincing students that they can be really good at this, and it doesn't require innate ability. It requires collaboration and some thinking skills and hard work and not being afraid to ask questions and not being afraid to put forth your ideas and listening to what others have to say. And so we are sending a message about what science is in some of the introductory classes that is really just school science.
And just to amplify on that, it is too easy to emphasize the need for speed, right? As you were saying, the person who immediately raises their hand or jumps out with the answer. And so it's so important, I think, in the classroom to give people time to think about it and to talk with their peers, and I always feel like I'm giving them more time than is necessary, and I really want to go on with the lesson plan, but the response rate is just so much higher if I
you
wait
give
that
time.
extra minute. It's
That's right.
incredible.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we, speaking of time, because I see the students that are transitioning into Berkeley, they're often freshmen, many of them are first generation students. They come in with incredible talent, but they can get messages very early on that the fact that you got a C on that exam means you're not good enough. And I can give you any number of narratives where if you tell that student, that's great, we're going to, keep it up, and they do better on the next one, and I just say, you should be so proud of your improvement. These are students who graduate with flying colors from Berkeley, all right? But we're not sending that message. And this student that I quoted from, she came into my section, but she would have walked out of the door, all right, and never to return to science after 4 weeks because the messages were not encouraging her. They're very inequitable, not just from her, but from her peers. The students are telling her this. They're excluding students from lab groups. They're excluding from study groups. And it's not so easy to get students in an equitable environment where they have the same access that more privileged students have. Okay, I'm done. All right. Any other, what else? Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Sharp from Equity and Inclusion. So, Brandi, you mentioned the word belonging in your opening comment, and I'd love to hear from all three of you how you create belonging in your classes and where the challenge points on that are and how you deal with those.
Well, I would say I try to do a couple of things. I definitely have used the think, pair, share model of getting people, offering a question, giving people moments to think about it, asking them to talk to one another in pairs, and then share back to the group so that people are given the opportunity and required to engage with one another at a more direct level and not just always have the attention directed toward the instructor or the more nebulous idea of the group, even in a circle formation, but like truly facilitating and encouraging that kind of direct exchange. I also, I think I try to model a certain kind of vulnerability, like imperfection, that it's okay, we're all in here learning and making mistakes, and let's be supportive of one another. I try to set ground rules at the beginning for this is the kind of space we want to have, and we will have it or we will not have it on the basis of our shared investment in creating a certain kind of learning environment. So I would say those are two things that I do.
Yeah, it's great to model that it's okay to make mistakes. I all the time I'm just going, I made a mistake. And so if the professor can make mistakes, then
Right.
it's okay if you make them. Lisa or Eugene?
One thing, so because I do project-based learning, I like to think, pair, share. Also just, maybe throw out an inquiry or a debate question, something broad and open and engaging relative to the topic. Let's break out in our teams and let's take 5 minutes and let's talk about it. And I think I heard in the earlier panel that I could walk around the room and see what's brewing, and maybe there's a less confident team that I can sit down and talk with for a minute, and then I can engage them. Sometimes you end up with super teams. We constantly evolve the teams through the projects so that you don't end up with a super team that stays the super team and some disadvantaged team relative to that. So I think that's one way of creating inclusion and welcoming. And then I want to honor that piece of we all make mistakes, and that's important. And I think looking at engineering failures is a place to go, there's a company that made a big mistake. They had to have a huge medical device recall, or there's from an ethical standpoint, there's a company that infringed on someone else's patent and it cost them $200 billion. And so it awakens the mindset a little bit. And the other thing I do, my classes are not these huge undergraduate required ones, they're more the technical electives, is everyone can, in the room, earn an A.
Yes.
And that's huge. that is huge. That the option is there for me to say, I don't care what I'm supposed to give the class. I want everyone in the room to show me opportunity for mastery and knowledge. And that just opens another possibility that they're not accustomed to seeing yet. Mm-hmm. So that would be how I handle that piece.
I think peer share is great. We hold votes in class, so everyone votes after discussion, so there's high rates of participation there. We also have, in addition to the lecture, there's office hours, of course, but there's this thing we call the Astronomy Learning Center, which is really just a homework help session. It's 2 hours every week and optional, but people come, they bring their problem set, they work either in 1s or 2s or sometimes even 3s, and what the instructors do, the GSI and myself, we go around and we just say, oh, hey, how's it going? And is there any issue here? We found that it's, you can do one of two things, right? Either you could just have everyone there and let it be a free-for-all, which is fine, that works too. Or you can be more proactive and actually approach some of these people and say, hey, how's it going? What are you working on now? And some people respond by saying, oh, yeah, everything's fine. And then in that case, that's cool. And so I just move on to the next person, or I sit down and wait a little while. But sometimes if they, it takes the instructor to overcome that initial energy barrier. So we try to make it easy on them by us taking the first step, and not in any super intrusive way, but just to say, hey, how's it going? And what are you working on? And leaving it light like that. I feel that increases a sense of belonging.
There was another question up here.
Well, I just wanted to add a couple of things that match what you were saying. Bob Jacobson, who's my dean, he always tells students that when he was an undergraduate, he never had a vowel on his transcript. He never got any A's. He said, he starts by saying, hi, I'm Bob, I'm a professor of physics at the best university, and I never had an A. So to kind of to remind them that it isn't only the people with the A's that are going to get to the top. And then he does what you do too, even though he's teaching a big physics class for biology majors or large class. He says, every single one of you can get an A if I teach well enough. And he said they never do all get A's, but the offer is out there, that you can all get A's.
And this is so important, because as soon as there's a curve, the students report that the competition starts and students very easily get excluded. This message of an absolute grading scale, I think, is really critical for an equitable classroom.
I wish we could get rid of grades, frankly.
Yeah.
I do, because I think the students have learned their whole lives to grade grub. That's how they got to Cal.
Yeah.
And now they're still grade grubbing instead of trying to learn something while they're here.
Well, and we've selected out super memorizers, and we assume in some of our classrooms that we've created an exam that is measuring something valid, not that we've ever checked on validity, and then we assume that the difference between an A and a C is like this, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's tiny things and maybe we wrote a bad question. Maybe there are questions on those exams that random students got right, and Okay, question.
Yeah, since you brought up the topic of validity, I'm just wondering, is there any interest among the panel in actually examining how big the problem really is when it comes to equity and inclusion? It's wonderful to hear this array of different tactics for coping with the problem, but do we know how big it is? Do we know where the problem is biggest?
So one piece of information, at least in the STEM fields, is that the first 2 years really make a big difference, and those are often math and chemistry classes. And the underrepresented students are significantly more likely to not complete. If they get to junior year, they'll actually do better than the majority students, but I think they're walking in and walking back out again. People intending to major in the sciences because they don't feel welcome. They don't feel they belong. So I think it's a pretty big issue. And I think we have a lot of resources that help students who kind of get through a little bit, and then there's these rich resources. But the initial courses need to change to really not. And again, we're not talking about lowering standards. We're talking about thinking differently about what it means to be good at science. Any other comments on that, or no? Other questions? Go ahead.
I'm Sandra Messick in Equity and Inclusion. I'm a non-academic. And what does it mean when you tell people everyone can get an A? I mean, as a student, I don't think I'd actually believe you. So how do you make that? Because Berkeley classes are so competitive, and the students are so competitive with each other. How do you actually get people to believe that and to know it's really true? I'm not sure I know how that's accomplished.
So one is word of mouth. Like
Yeah.
when I do teach our undergraduate required mechanics and materials courses, I'm on rotation for that class. There's a waiting list to get in. They know that I'll be fair, and they know I'll be equitable, and they know I'm inclusive. Mm-hmm. And I'm very much respectful of, maybe I wrote the bad question. And so usually if I have a student that's not doing well on that first measure of test of understanding, invite them to come in and see me. And so, oftentimes in that situation, I literally send them back out. Let's have you work this back through. I'll meet you in the middle. I will because really it's not about the grade, it's about their understanding and mastery. And I think frankly I just rely on the students know this about me, and I don't broadcast it, but I do think people believe that the opportunity is there.
So some science courses will say the top 15% are going to get A's and that's it. As opposed to saying if you achieve this percentage of all of the points, and we'll help you get there, that you'll get an A.
And it sounds like you're more available.
Yeah, it feels very different when you have that. And they don't all get A's, but they all know that they could, and then they know that they'll be treated fairly. And always, rather than saying, you got a C, so you must not be very good at this, to say, you got a C, let's talk about what was hard for this exam. How can you prepare differently? What study methods are you using? And really, I provide a lot of support for how study groups should behave with one another and whatnot, especially at the end. We're all talking about different level students. These are mostly freshmen that I'm working with.
Quick question about curves. Is that something that is across the campus not mandatory? It has, it's mandatory that we have a curve. Is it not anywhere else?
I don't think it's to my knowledge, it's not mandatory.
But I don't have the option.
Well, I hardly ever give all A's,
Well, cool,
just the options there.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's a great.
So it's interesting that it is mandatory in Haas.
Yeah.
I don't think it's mandatory elsewhere. I think it's what has been. This is part of the tradition. How do we rethink where we are in terms of the traditional ways in which we approach these things? And we definitely have faculty who explicitly say, if you got a C, you should think of doing something else, and then not having a clue that this student just progressed from here to here, and the student who got an A went from here to here, right? And I guarantee this student who just did this big jump is going to be a star.
So I just wanted to clarify something. I don't give A's. The students, the students earn A's, but we don't have a mandatory requirement in mechanical engineering, but we get a strong reminder from the vice chair every single semester. If you're teaching this level course, this is your target average. And right after I delete it and throw it away, I just, broadcasting this. My thought is if the students in the room can earn it, then I'm willing to write a document explaining how they've all shown that, or why my distribution is different.
And the reason that some departments have these percentages is to guard against the faculty who just decide to give everyone A's because they get high teaching evaluations.
I think too, if you tell the students that they're being graded on their own performance and it's not relative to whatever another group of students in the class get, that's what's really important. And I'd love to see, I remember we used to say, all right, if you bomb the first test, and you show a certain degree of improvement later on, I'm willing to adjust your grade, especially if the final is cumulative.
Yep.
It shows that it demonstrates their knowledge overall. And the other positive thing about when you don't have a curve, you're encouraging students to form groups. It's not like maybe when I went to school that somebody might try to sabotage a chemistry unknown in lab because there are only so many A's, and so you've got to go, use cutthroat tactics. But when you encourage others to work together because you want them to be able to demonstrate they know the material, and I say the same thing. I'll defend my grades to the dean or whatever because you've demonstrated that you know this material.
Go ahead.
I'm really interested in how you all deal with the idea of equity when certainly you have students who have really different access to resources. Some are working full-time jobs, some have, their parents paying everything. It's really, the system isn't equitable. How do you try and foster that in your students?
That's a really important question, and I thank you for raising it. It's hard. Because that, if we get to that final question about, pedagogical challenges that we're facing, I think that is one that is really important to acknowledge. I would say that my answer to that is really to try to ensure that there are multiple assessment modes in the classroom so that some of them are about the quality of your presence in the room and not about the amount of time you have to produce, 5 drafts of something before you turn it in versus another student who has that ability. I can't, I have a responsibility in terms of teaching a portion of a departmental curriculum and saying these are the things that we as a department believe you need to know in order to continue and get the most out of the thing that comes next in our curriculum to assess how much a student has demonstrated their understanding of the things we believe they need to know. But in terms of giving them different modes of opportunity to demonstrate that understanding, I feel like that's what I can do to try to address some of the life inequities that manifest in different kinds of performance in the classroom and on out-of-class assignments.
So I work with a group of students, about 120 in the fall semester, who have come from under-resourced high schools or first-generation low-income students. So we work interactively during class, so I get to know them. One thing that I try to do is empower them to not be afraid to ask or tell me how I can help them. They don't realize how much the privileged students are asking for. And I have extra textbooks. I have extra lab manuals. I have extra materials. I can, give them a break on the assignment and let it come in days later. And, they need to tell me. And so empowering them to say, it's okay, we want to support you. Is another way to approach it. But they're the ones that never ask. It's so hard to get them to ask.
I think there's no shortcut here. We address it by just making ourselves available on an individual basis, right? To talk about an individual's particular circumstances. I don't think there's any shortcut. So we do have one-on-ones with our students. We make ourselves available. Sometimes they email with questions, and it's time, it's a cost, it's a burden on us. But we, at the class level of 40 to 60 students, I think it's actually okay. 2 GSIs and one instructor, we can manage it. But answering those questions in real time, and then telling the rest of the class, hey, I got a lot of questions over email over the weekend. You know that this is an option for the rest of you too, right? So, but I don't think there's a shortcut, and we just have to make ourselves available. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm wondering if you can talk more about the different learning styles and how you would change, you're talking about doing derivations, Lisa, about how do you change stuff like that where can you give more examples?
Okay, yeah, so I did a teaching workshop with Rich Felder, who's at UNC, and he actually has a website, and you can test your own learning preferences. And one of the things that he shares with young faculty primarily, I was actually a very old faculty at the time when I went to participate, is you tend to teach in your own style of learning without even knowing it. And so that was an eye-opener for me. I knew when I was in his workshop and saw these different styles of learning that explained why my childhood learning had been so challenging for me, because I'm not a sequential learner. So I probably never would have made it to engineering. I'm a global learner. I'm one of those people that I have to see the picture on the box and then I just build it, but I can't follow the directions. Even now, I cannot do a step. It's impossible, but I can take the picture and I see it and I can reason it out. So one of the things that Richard Felder said is, if you put a picture on that first slide and you kind of put the perspective of where all this is bringing you, you've given the visual and the global learner something right there. Then you can still have pieces where you're deriving, and then there's the verbal versus visual. There are those that are going to see more of the visual aids, the flow charts, those aspects, that resonates for them. Others like storytelling, verbal, or even mathematics is a verbal form of learning. Intuitive reflective, that share pair piece. If you make it an immediate exercise and you cold call, the active learner is advantaged. The reflective learner needed maybe a minute or two to think it through, and that sharing piece is also an engaging aspect. So that he has 4 platforms, and I just try to blend it in, and it's really transformed how I teach.
I think an important point about what Lisa just said is also that picture at the beginning provides the context, and the derivation alone, it doesn't mean very much if you don't understand where it fits in, what the underlying ideas are. And I think we tend to teach often as a laundry list, as opposed to what are the real core principles and what are we applying them to? What's the big picture around that?
I follow every lecture that I provide. The end slide is a "you should be able to," and that's essentially those are my learning objectives framed back to them. These are the things that I would expect that you should be able to do, and that keeps me honest, because sometimes when I was a younger faculty, if I taught the whole textbook, good for me, and the students felt like they had been drinking out of a fire hose, whereas if the stuff becomes visceral and if it's something that's embodied for them, it's so much more powerful. And so reframing less is more, and actually giving them these are the things as a result of this, and these activities that you should be able to do, really helps keep me honest, and it frames it back to them.
And this part has been a real struggle for me to kind of define what are the few, not many, underlying principles. Here's the global picture, here are the underlying principles, and we're going to keep working with them. We're going to keep applying them. We're going to make them a little bit bigger. We're going to add to them. And it's really hard to think about your discipline in that way, because it's intuitive. I don't know what it is, right? So trying to pull it back out is really, really challenging. Go ahead.
I had a case many years ago, which I would say embodied the complementary problem of what you've been addressing. I had a student he was an East Asian American, big muscular guy. He comes to my office. He wasn't performing well, so I had a private meeting with him. And he came and he literally started weeping in my office. And fortunately I had a big roll of paper towel there. And I started probing why he doesn't feel he belongs. And he said, because I'm only in EECS. He said, I'm only in EECS because my parents wanted me to be in EECS. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with that kind of a problem where you find yourself in the position where the best advice you can give is actually for the student to explore something else? By the way, just to follow up a little bit, I asked him, so what do you want to do?
Mhm.
He said, I want to study military science. And I was taken aback, but I had no idea. I still to this day don't have a whole lot of idea what military science is. So I asked him to research what military science is, his career trajectories, and have an intelligent discussion with his dad.
So we see that a lot, especially with I'm going to be a doctor, getting the push from the parent when the student really does not want to be anywhere near any of this. And so I think the best you can do is help the student think about what he or she really wants to do, but then really delving into it and coming up with some good arguments as to what, for the parents in particular, as to why they, and sometimes you just need to empower the student, I think. You know, they're getting to an age where they need to kind of not be under that kind of stress. It's very stressful for these
Very
students. Yeah.
I've seen this in a lot of our women PhD students who end up with the Chancellor's Fellowship. And they think they should be here, they've got this fellowship, and there's a lot of pressure coming from their parents, the weeping in the office, the not being able to find the platform for their qualifying exam. And then I think in that moment, it's just honoring where they're at. I certainly have been in this role a few times when I was the vice chair of grad studies, because you really what you may end up having to advise is that maybe a PhD in engineering isn't for you. If what you're telling me is you want to go teach high school science and that's your passion, then let's work on that. But what I don't do is just hang them out. Let's give you a teaching opportunity and see how that resonates for you. And I've gone as far as handing them Susan Scott's How to Have a Difficult Conversation, because sometimes what they really need is to have a difficult conversation with their parents, and empowering them.
Empowering them to know how to have that conversation. And really trying to do it, what you did, try to figure out what it was that individual wanted to do, and then kind of helping them think that through.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between being or feeling pushed out and choosing to walk away, and knowing that you're walking towards something else from an informed and engaged perspective.
Yeah,
and that's what we hope for.
Yeah, I often tell them that, they're in this position that they don't like. They certainly don't want to jump very quickly into another situation that they don't like. So it's very important that they stop, take stock, and start to do some of the things that we're talking about, right?
Many examples like this at the undergraduate and graduate level. Again, no shortcut. It's, for me, spending the time with the person, talking one-on-one, trying my best not to actually say explicitly what I personally think, but letting them come to a conclusion on their own. And so there's an art to that. And in many cases, they do arrive at the conclusion on their own. In some cases that are extreme, I've called on help from the campus. So students of concern committee, and a couple times I called the case in, and a counselor came in and helped. They proved very effective, I should say. Yeah, because very often, right, it's more than just the academics. It's also their personal lives that are involved as well. And there, I really am not qualified. So I call in the professionals.
So let's take just one or two more questions back there and then over here, and then we'll do a brief concluding remark from each of you. Go ahead.
I love everything y'all are saying. I really like how y'all are trying to think about different ways people learn, and also office hours. I was an undergrad here, I'm a PhD student here now, and I've been through the whole grade uni thing. It did get me pretty far in life, I'll admit, being a grade uni. But one thing that I always hear, I mentor a lot of undergrads, and we do a lot of work with Pedagogical and Richard and Amy, and one thing that a lot of undergrads tend to say is, like, I'll go to a course, and then sometimes, like, I won't understand it, and then after a few class meetings, I just leave it. Or, like, I've even met some STEM majors who would say, like, I made it to my second year in, like, MCV or IB, and they just switched to public health because their GPA just getting so slammed after a long time. And I'm wondering, in those, like, when you teach your courses, do you all ever like use any types of checkpoints, or like what are the different ways, that you wish faculty could apply more of to kind of make sure students are actually prepared for these and are actually learning these in authentic way, like learning these concepts in authentic ways, or things that they can carry with them to future classes?
Well, the in-class voting, those are checkpoints, right? There are maybe more nuts and bolts things like performance on an exam. If a student, something like 5% of our students, maybe on the midterm one, they score rather poorly. And so we will take the time to email them and say, hey, this is what you got. It's not looking so great. So please, just if you want to learn more, we are here for you. And it's a personalized message. Yeah. Again, not forcing them to come in, not even asking them to come in, but just saying we are here for you. Mm-hmm. Those are checkpoints. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything else? Or?
I do something similar, but maybe it's a little more. If I see a student even less than an 80 on a test of understanding, I'll just offer an invitation to come see me in office hours, just handwritten.
Mm-hmm. And there was one other question. Oh, there.
So we have very diverse student body economically, with their academic background, culturally, et cetera. You all sound like you've reached a certain level of your own personal awareness when you're teaching to your students with the analogies that you choose. You even made the mention of not referencing ski week because not everybody has ski week, for example. How did you get to that point? Were you able to assess your own inherent biases on some level? And also, it sounds like some of you have some administrative roles. Have you been able to talk to your colleagues about getting to that level, or have sought other resources to help, maybe trainings or something like that, to help people approach their students in their classrooms with a more equitable mindset, even just in the way that they're phrasing their analogies, their responses to questions, things like that?
I'll take one stab. I've been in a number of administrative roles, and one of them was the Equity and Inclusion Diversity Officer for Mechanical Engineering. So we did climate dinners, and we invited not only, so then we wanted to have a conversation with the women in the department, maybe a conversation with underrepresented groups in the department, and then invite some of the faculty from the department to come and listen. I think those that have maybe had firsthand experiences also have a different perception than maybe some of my colleagues who they've never had firsthand experience. So they're at a struggle too, because they're trying to figure out how to navigate the waters. So that was probably the most beneficial thing I was able to do for our department, and it's an ongoing challenge.
One other thing that's happening across the campus slowly in the College of Engineering, it's happened this year, that new hires are being asked about the contributions that they have made, potentially will make or want to make, and what their understanding is of equity and inclusion. And so we hope that the bar will raise the bar in our faculty hiring to include not just research excellence, but also excellence along these other dimensions. They'll come in and they'll start educating us.
Just to follow on that, I mean, we do pay very close attention to the course evaluations, right? So the students will say, okay, these analogies worked for us, but this, maybe they veered a little too, politically incorrect or anything like that. That comes out in the course evaluations, and we read those. We read those not just for the classes, but every year we ask the graduate students to fill out an annual progress report. And it's free form. They can say whatever they'd like about the classes they took, the research they're doing, and they're quite vocal. And they write a number of things. And the faculty read those annual progress reports collectively, and we hold a faculty meeting about it, and we talk about some of the things that are going on in the classroom. So there is a feedback loop there that's proven quite useful.
I wonder if each of you, oh, sorry, Brandi, go ahead.
I just want to address one part of your question, which is, how did I, as a sample, get to a state of awareness about these sorts of things? I would say part of that is, the love one has for teaching and the desire to see your students succeed, and understanding that in order for them to succeed, you have to meet them where they are and then pull them toward where you want them to arrive. And I think I did my undergraduate degree here, and so I have even another layer of understanding beyond the 15 years I've been here as a faculty member. Like, it's a different Berkeley, and the student population is a different population than it was when I was an undergraduate. It's a different population than it was when I started teaching here. So meeting them where they are constantly involves moving. And so trying to understand where they are means understanding things and having to self-educate. I think continuing education, as a principal, as a best practice of being a responsible faculty member and campus citizen is crucial, like having to learn things about this first generation college experience. And I sound like such an ass. This first generation college experience. That there's my, privilege showing in the clunky language with which I say that, but acknowledging it as a thing and learning, oh my gosh, all these things that I didn't realize I was taking for granted that a certain student population absolutely doesn't and can't. And once you become aware, you become curious to learn more and do better in those ways. So I would say that's one particular example, thinking about class issues and first gen issues. Obviously, my lived experience gives me some understanding of the URM issues, but I think that desire, as I said, to meet students where they are means understanding where they are.
And not making assumptions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So maybe just one final comment from each of you of where you want to leave our audience.
I might just close by returning to the first idea that I had, which is there are students in my class who will never take an astronomy class again, but I want them to come away with positive feelings about the universe. And so the best example for me was a student who was in engineering. He was a senior. He got a solid C. I mean solid. Okay. There's no ambiguity about his performance for me anyway, and neither for him. But he had such a great attitude. And after the class, he said he was adventuring in Europe. And he sent us an email, the instructors and me, an email saying, oh, I'm in Germany now at this science museum, and there's these really great exhibits on black body radiation. And I thought, that's just the perfect outcome, right? I mean, the person was not high performing, okay, but they love astronomy. So that's my goal.
I would say two things. One, in terms of equitable access and hopefully outcomes in the classroom, and the question of, the grade stuff especially, and I think this is a wonderful example. I really try to encourage my students to understand that we have a certain institutional obligation to assess in numerical / or alphanumerical ways. But really for each student, it's about growth, so no matter where you are, you may be a kick-ass reader and writer, but not so good in group conversation or whatever. We can all get better at something. So I encourage all of my students to figure out where's the place you want to grow. And check in with yourself repeatedly over the course of the semester. And it's not necessarily the case that your grades on the papers or the exams are going to be the thing that's the proper feedback loop on that. But what's your target, and how can we support you in achieving that goal? And the second thing is that I feel bad that I didn't have any answer to the gentleman in the back's question about, understanding the scope of the issues that we're addressing with a panel like this. And I don't have a great answer, but I guess I just have an encouragement to all of us, is that we need to listen to our students and we need to believe them and then try to do better.
Mm-hmm. Lisa?
So something I wanted to share is, for me, being here at Berkeley is as much about teaching and pedagogy and research as it is mentoring. And in terms of my own experience, I was a very shy and introverted underrepresented person in the field of engineering, and some professor saw something in me before I could even see it for myself. And he met me where I was at, and he showed me a way, and he was a good mentor. And then he led me to another mentor who showed me the way to grad school, and for which I had a great PhD mentor. And when you mentor well, those that you have mentored will pass that gift along. And I think that's something that we can all just kind of build into our embody. I think we all do it, but we don't necessarily think about the role that the power we have to change someone's life.
Well, with that, I hope you'll all walk away from here questioning your assumptions, getting to know your students, and continuing to learn about how to really support them to achieve. So thank you for all your great questions, and we really enjoyed it.